The more you respect yourself and the more you consider yourself a craftsman, and the more you charge accordingly, the more your customers and clients are going to respect you as long as you do the work of a craftsman, which most of us these days do, especially anybody who's listening to this podcast. Welcome to the 40th Anniversary Edition of the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Mason Lord of Hudson Valley Preservation. I'm joined by Finnish carpenter and longtime Fine Homebuilding contributor Gary Katz and producer Jeff Rose. Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Before we get going, a little about myself and about why I wanted to interview Gary. This is also my 40th year in the industry, and I am the founding partner of Hudson Valley Preservation, a design-build company in Kent, Connecticut, in the northwest corner of the state. We do a lot of renovations and some new construction. I have a story. Currently, I am in the process of building a new home for myself and my family. The home is a panelized unity home, and as part of the package, I had 8 pre-hung doors to install. The first door I started, and it wasn't a disaster, but being a renovator who works in a lot of older homes, we're typically faced with 1 or 2 doors here and there. I think I pretty much blamed the doors for all the problems I was having. The manufacturer made the stops too tight. There were problems all over. Shims were falling out. It was very frustrated, and I wasn't happy with the outcome. So what do we do today when we have a problem like that? Go to YouTube and search pre-hung door hanging. And what came up first was a video by Gary Katz, how to hang pre-hung doors. I watched the video several times, and the thing I loved about it was that it's a system and a production system. And I love systems and I love production systems. So for the following 7 doors, I went ahead and followed every step sequentially in each opening. And each door went better than the next. And it was like magic. And when I was done, the guy on my left shoulder said, "You moron, why didn't you pay more attention to this guy Gary Katz years ago, when you saw him at JLC?" And the guy on my right shoulder said, "Dude, you ain't nothing but good." It was really, really special. After I finished, I wanted to send Gary an email and thank him. But then this opportunity came along where I can thank Gary in person. As a carpenter, I am grateful for your help and proud to conduct this interview as part of Fine Homebuilding's 40th anniversary celebration. Gary, there's so much to talk about. Like so many of us in the industry, your interest in carpentry was sparked in your youth and blossomed after college when you first went out on your own in the mid-70s. There were some big highs and big lows in that first decade, which we won't focus on now, but in the early 90s, you connected with Fine Homebuilding. How did that happen? First, thank you, Mason, for having me on the program. I'm deeply honored, really, truly. It's a big deal. Fine Homebuilding has always been a big deal for me, as it would be for any writer, any carpenter, any author, any tradesperson. To be published in the magazine is such a huge deal. And it has a huge impact on your life, too. So I can't thank you and the magazine enough for all you all have done to help me with my career. And
and the desires I've always had to do more and to help the trades and everything. I I've completely forgot your question.
So how did you connect in the early 90s with Fine Home Building?
I had some friends in Los Angeles who knew Shandor Nagoslansky, and they invited me over for dinner one night, and Shandor came for dinner, and we got into a conversation. And I don't know if you know Shandor, but he's a very straight-spoken person who doesn't beat around the bush. I said I was a writer. He said, "You're a writer and a carpenter. How would you like to? You should write for Fine Homebuilding, for Fine Woodworking." At the time, he was the editor of Fine Woodworking. I said, "I'd love to." He said, "Well, I'll tell you the same thing I tell every other potential author I meet, and you're going to probably do the same thing they've all done, which is nothing. But if you write something, put something together and send it to me, I'll help you get published in Fine Homebuilding. But like I said, I'll never hear from you." So I took it as a challenge, and I wrote an article on installing mortise locks and cylindrical locks, and shot pictures, which I didn't know how to do, and sent it all to him. And he said, "This isn't really for fine woodworking. This is better for fine home building." And when he said that, I thought, yeah, he was full of it all along. He was just leading me along, he was just blowing smoke at me. And he said, "Well, I'll walk this over to the editor of Fine Home Building, and they'll get in touch with you." And I think maybe a day later, I got an email or a phone call. I think at that time it was telephone, not email, from Kevin Ireton. And that's how I started my relationship with Fine Home Building. He published my first 2 articles. He took that article on lock sets, he split it in 2. He published one on cylindrical locks and one on mortise locks. He sent an editor out to my place and shot photographs. We had a store that my brother started, Coast Store and Hardware, and we bought 6 Doug fir 6-panel entry doors for my home. This is what Fine Home Building told me to do. And I prepped each door. I hung each door so it fit the opening. And when the editor came, we drilled holes in each one of those doors. And as we completed the door, I set it outside on the curb, hopefully somebody would take it. And by the time we were done, they were all gone. It was pretty fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you made it to the East Coast to meet with Kevin at some point, didn't you?
Yeah. It was after I'd been publishing articles in Fine Homebuilding for a while. Somebody said you should publish a book on doors. And so I started talking with their book department, and they got pretty excited about the idea and invited me out there to have an editorial meeting. And so it was just a nightmare for me, but traveling was difficult for me, very difficult. And I managed to get out there in one piece. And I'll never forget going into Kevin's office and sitting on the other side of his desk, from him. And, my whole life, I told you the story when we were speaking last week, my whole life had been spent pretty much on the job site, other than school, where college and postgraduate work that I'd been involved in up until then, where I was around, a totally different kind of group of people. The folks that I was around on job sites were all carpenters, and they didn't have a lot in common with me, or rather, I didn't have a lot in common with them. I was a reader, a writer, I had all these variety of interests that they didn't have, which is cool. But I always thought I was kind of weird. And when I sat across the desk from Kevin and we started talking, and he started talking about his interest in music and literature, and I felt like, oh my goodness, I finally found people that made me feel comfortable, made me feel common in a sense, like companionship in a sense that was more fulfilling in a way. That I realized, gosh, there were people in my trade who were like me, who were intellectually curious and creative and everything the kinds of things that really excited me. And that was my introduction to Fine Homebuilding. It seems like every one of the editors I worked with at that magazine, Roe Osborne especially, were driven by this like creative, like unquenchable creative need to produce something that was better than anything they ever could have before, or something like that. There was never any satisfaction in a way with what they were doing. They always wanted something better than what they were doing, and that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. Gary, I've heard you talk about patience and patience in that you need to be patient to be a good carpenter. It's a very important trait to have. And knowing a little bit about your career trajectory, I noticed that you got a master's in English, that you started in 1988 and you completed in 1996. That's 8-9 years worth of night school, I would assume, to become a writer. And had you done any writing before you did the Fine Homebuilding articles?
A lot. I've been writing since I was a kid, fiction and short stories and all of that. But I'd never published anything. I tried. I got a real good collection of letters, rejection letters and stuff from like the New Yorker and places you try to get your short stories published. Atlantic, obviously I never succeeded in that direction, but this couple who I knew in LA that introduced me to Shandor, they were at dinner that night and they said, "You should really do this. You'll get paid." And I went, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, you'll make money." And so, getting a check from Fine Homebuilding, get out of here. First you're getting published, then they're sending you a check on top of that. Nice. It was extraordinary.
Yeah. So from Fine Homebuilding in the early 2000s, you started the Katz Roadshow. And for people that don't know Gary that well, I see you as an icon before social media. You were known by many, many, many carpenters. Certainly anybody that was in the Fine Homebuilding, Journal of Light Construction realm knew who Gary Katz was. And in, 15, 20 years, you did 350 shows in 250 lumber yards, which I find to be incredible. And there must have been a great responsibility that you felt with teaching carpenters and sharing your knowledge. And what drove you to do that?
I guess if I was honest, I would say it was some kind of inner need to feel like I wasn't worthless piece of, whatever, can't use that word. I wasn't kind of like a weak, sick, kind of wuss, because I grew up pretty sick and had this idea in my head that since my body wasn't healthy, I was some kind of weakling or something. And I guess part of it was that need to kind of like, struggle against that kind of self-esteem problem. But part of it was also the recognition that if I felt that way about being a carpenter, because I felt that way about carpentry too, I felt like I was a loser, Mm-hmm. I was working with my hands. My parents, my mother especially, always told me that anybody that works with their hands is a loser. And it seemed like the only thing I could do that made me feel good, and yet it made me feel like a loser. I felt like if I felt like I was a loser, it must be a bunch of other carpenters that felt the same way, and they shouldn't. And as I dug deeper into like architectural history and researched a book I'd been working on mantelpieces, I discovered that tradespeople had, at one time, been some of the most respected people in our culture. And something happened, and I didn't understand what, but I was struck by that deeply emotionally. And as I started doing shows, I realized that the guys in the audiences, and the women too, especially, the few women who would attend, but some of these big, huge guys who are super healthy and strong and productive kind of felt like they were less than a garbage collector because they were working job sites. They were laborers or whatever. And I kind of took it on as a mission to help people understand that what they were doing was incredibly valuable and difficult. Took years to learn. I mean, years and years and years of hard work and mistakes and personal growth in order to become a good carpenter, and that they should be proud of it. And I think that had a big impact at my shows. And it wasn't just me doing them, it was Mike Slogan and Rick Arnold and God, all of the help we had from Tom Brewer, who helped set up all of the management stuff and the traveling and the shipping and all of that. Just a lot of people were involved in it. My daughter, who came on board about 10 years into the program and started organizing all of the scheduling and the contacts with the sponsors and the lumber yards. Just everybody that got involved in it had the same kind of mission, which was just, to reach people, improve the craft, and really reach people and help them improve their lives and what they thought of themselves.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that feeling less than. And I didn't have the health issues that you had. And so I didn't feel like a weakling, but I still felt less than. I think I remember in the early 80s, a carpenter, how they used to have the sexiest men based on career? And I think one year carpenters were actually considered that. But so I can relate to that. And so speaking of your health, so you mentioned that traveling across the country to see Fine Homebuilding was a really difficult thing. I can't imagine how grueling for a healthy person that 250 shows or whatever it was for you. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
I will, mostly because if there's someone listening to this program that has a health issue and struggles with it, I kind of feel I've kind of learned. Fortunately, I've been lucky to survive and live this long. I've learned that, gosh, sometimes those challenges can be the most important thing in your life, the ones you face personally. And that certainly has been for me. It's been the case for me because I grew up with ulcerative colitis that was kind of misdiagnosed, and I had my colon removed and this crazy experimental kind of surgery done, a J-pouch, which turned out to be a nightmare because I didn't have ulcerative colitis, I had Crohn's disease. And eventually, after 20 years of struggling with it and doing road shows with that silly J-pouch, they finally removed it and gave me an ileostomy. And I've been, since 2017, I've been like almost healthy, because of that. But all those years of not being able to do anything easily and always worried about where the next bathroom was and that kind of stuff is just like, it, I don't know. That kind of stuff either makes you or breaks you, and you have a choice. You have a choice on whether it makes you or breaks you. It's just like, the Buddhists say you have a choice of whether you want to suffer or not. You know what I mean? To some degree you do, and you can turn those moments of pain into real moments of growth and enjoyment too,
Yeah. You also did a lot of videos, and certainly the one that I saw, but there were a lot of others. And I'm curious. you hear entertainers, and one thing that really enamored me to your system, it wasn't just you giving the system in a video, you were engaging. And so I see you as an entertainer. Certainly when you were presenting in JLC and all of these others, you had to be entertaining. Otherwise, people would have lost interest despite the fact that you were giving good information. And I often hear that entertainers can't stand looking back on their previous work. And maybe it's two questions. Would you change things in your videos? And do you look at your old videos ever?
I'm not averse to looking at them. I just don't have time. But I do on occasion, look at some of them to figure out how I did something because I forget, to relearn. How do you do that anyway, especially with cutting stairs or something like that? That's really, to me, I don't do frequently. So it's, whenever I do something like that, it's nice to get a refresher. But
yeah,
I agree. I think that, number one, I was, thanks to Craig Savage and other people that helped me set up a website and gave me the ability to, in a sense, self-publish at a time when nobody could really. I was able to start the Katz Roadshow. I was able to produce DVDs, and nothing against Fine Homebuilding, but for someone like me, and now there are a lot of people like me out on social media, on Instagram, I see quite a few, who are really talented and really want to communicate the things they've learned, and they're good at it. Back when I started, there weren't many avenues in which to do that. Today, there are countless ones, but when I started, I was able to do it because of folks like Craig Savage that helped me build that kind of like foundation to do it with. And the DVDs were part of that. They allowed me to self-publish and not go through an editorial committee at Fine Homebuilding and that kind of thing. They allowed me to do stuff independently, the way I saw it, the way I wanted it to be. And it was just so rewarding to take the risk, to go to companies and ask for their support and sponsorship. And the whole thing was just like, I can't tell you. It was just so exciting. It was incredibly exciting. And the end product was always exciting. Like, wow, I produced this DVD on how to use a miter saw. It was the first thing I did. And it had a huge impact. And I realized from doing JLC Live, which was kind of like the next sequential step in my career after publishing the Door Hanger's Handbook, Craig Savage called me and said, "Hey, you should be doing this stuff at our JLC Live shows." And I said, "You're what? I never heard of it, And the next thing I knew, I was flying out to Baltimore with a bunch of tools in my stupid J pouch, to get up in front of an audience and hang doors. And it was probably the most terrifying thing I'd ever done in my life. I was in front of maybe 200 people on this big stage with my door bench and my scribes and my planer and my boring jig, and I'm planing away on this door and flipping it over on my bench, and I'm about to cut the top of it, and I'll never forget looking at the audience. And this is in the beginning, when I was totally terrified, looking at the audience and the guys in the front row seats who could really see what was going on. They were like scared to death. They were freaked out. They were staring at me like, holy, that guy's going to cut his hand off. I was shaking so much. When I set that skill saw down on the door and went to make that cut, I had to stop and look at the audience and say, "Hey, you guys that are sitting in the back can't see this, but the guys in the front are scared to death because I'm shaking so much. But watch, I can shake this much and still cut the top of this door perfectly straight." And I did. It was shocking. So it was at that moment when I realized, I had that ability to emote and connect with people in the audience by sharing what I was feeling. And that, I think, is what's important about being an entertainer. If you have that ability to share not what you've learned and not what you know, but what you're feeling, then you can reach people. If you can't share what you're feeling, then you won't succeed at reaching people or being a good presenter. And I think the guys at JLC and the guys that worked with me at the Roadshow, like Mike Slogat and Rick Arnold, they all knew this. They all knew how to tell stories about, the moment when they screwed up or how good it felt when they did something right or wrong or whatever. So sorry for the long
Yeah, no,
response,
that's
but
yeah, no, that and I would say in general, carpenters are probably visual learners.
yes,
I know myself that I when I was doing my pre-hung doors, the video was all I watched. But since then, in our company, we have put together a PowerPoint of the system, and there are a couple of slides in there that are from written. And my favorite slide in our little production PowerPoint is the one that shows which screws number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, because I never remember which is the first one or the second one. So I can refer to that really quickly, and then I'm boom, moving on in the system.
I couldn't agree
So,
more. That's like I said, in order to reach people, you have to be able to, reach them through your feeling, through some kind of emotional connection first. But boy, in order to reach a carpenter, you got to convince them that first you have something important to tell them, and you have to keep it really simple. You have to come up with a really simple, systematic, system-based kind of, rule-based approach to problems that we face, common problems that we face on a job site. And if you can succeed at doing that, then you can help people. Then you can really have an impact, on somebody's life. And it's got nothing to do with you now. It's them. It's what you're doing for them. It's not like, oh, look at me, I'm publishing in Fine Homebuilding or some kind of stuff like that. That may be important when you first start, but that's not the fuel that keeps you on the highway, long term. That's not what gets you way down the road. What really gets you down the road is, seeing the impact that you have on other people and the value that has in their life. So that kind of system thing, like you taking that 5 fastener system and making a little like PowerPoint thing out of it, that just rings my bell like to no end, But I get letters and stuff from people saying, God, I used to hate hanging doors. I'm just tempted to say, hey, pal, you're still not hanging doors. That's a pre-hung. You can't hang a pre-hung. They're already hung. You're installing a pre-hung. You're not hanging it. But I don't often give you that because I don't want to make them feel bad. But but it's neat when they recognize that they're ours. Once you learn that too about one thing, it's kind of cool how, wow, that applies to other things, and you begin to analyze your own approach to stuff, whether you have a system or not. You start analyzing, hey, is this the smartest way to approach this? Is this the best way? Is this an effective way to cut these rafters? Is this an effective way to climb a ladder? Is this a skillful way? I like the word skillful instead of stupid. Is this a skillful way to, run baseboard? That kind of thing. Is this a skillful way to raise my kids? Is this a skillful way to support my relationship with my family or my wife? You know what I mean? It's all the same. It's all the same thing. Yeah.
yeah, nice. You brought up earlier the lack of respect for the trades, and in a previous podcast, John Abrams was on with, I think it was Rob Yeagan on the Keep Craft Alive Fine Homebuilding podcast. And he brought up the story of when he had started in business in his in Martha's Vineyard, and he had a mentor business friend who was a much older man who really liked the company and followed them, and was speaking to John one day and said, well, this is really great, but are you making any money? And John said, well, no. And so the guy said, "Oh, you have a really interesting business plan there. Subsidized housing or affordable housing for the wealthy." So that was a slap in the face. And really, I think John was like, "Oh my God, what am I doing? Where am I going? What does this career mean?" And I'm curious, have you had something similar to that, or do you have a story to tell that might be related to that?
I think all of us suffer, almost every single one of us suffers from the same kind of character. I don't want to call it a flaw, so it's because it's not. It's just the way we are built, especially carpenters, where you started with this like self-esteem problem in the first place. You want people to like you want people to appreciate you, and you think that if you give them a deal or you do something nice for them, they'll be nice to you. They'll appreciate you more. When that customer says, "By the way, while you're here," and you say, "Oh, sure, I'll be happy to do that," that is a slippery slope, and the first step down that slope is when you say, "Oh, sure." The response needs to be, "I will definitely look at that, and I'll let you know what it'll cost to do it." It's so simple. That's the first step. The second step is never tell anybody what it's going to cost while you're looking at it. You wait until the next day at least. It's like that email you want to send to somebody right now. You never click send until the next day. You always charge for what you do, because if you don't, you're kind of I don't know, you're kind of creating or committing the same sin twice in a way. You already have low respect for yourself, and now you're kind of instructing your client not to respect you much either, because you're saying, "I'll do this stuff for free just to get you to like me." That's kind of like the dog that rolls over and puts its legs up in the air, and says, "Don't hurt me, just pet me," and you can't be that way in our society, in our culture, because it's not healthy. It invites people to mistreat you. They can't help doing it either. It's just instinctive or whatever it is. It just isn't good. It isn't healthy. It's not skillful. What you need to do is respect yourself, and one of the first ways of doing that is, dress properly. Wear a shirt with your company logo, and have a clean, well-organized truck, and try not to use too many four-letter words which I fail at. But all of those things, we fail at a lot of them anyway. But still, you need to charge for your work too. That's part of self-respect. And I kind of feel like sometimes the more you charge, the more respect you'll get. In some ways, it's true. If you don't think of yourself as a craftsman, and you don't recognize your value because you are a craftsman, then your clients never will either. And if they don't, then they're not going to be willing to pay you. It's a circle. The more you respect yourself, and the more you consider yourself a craftsman, and the more you charge accordingly, the more your customers and clients are going to respect you, as long as you do the work of a craftsman, which most of us these days do, especially anybody who's listening to this podcast or reads Fine Homebuilding or JLC or makes any effort, to study their craft and improve. They're obviously craftsmen. They care about their product and about themselves, and you just have to convince other people to do the same thing. And by not charging enough, you're definitely convincing them of the opposite. And so that's a hard-learned lesson in our business, I think. Most of us don't learn it until we're in our 40s or 50s, if we learn it then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tough one.
When we spoke before, you had a story of a carpenter contractor in Encino.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to hear that story again.
I won't use any names, but I have these friends, the same friends who introduced me to Shondor, who this woman who's a tile setter said to me that she was on a job site up in the Encino Hills, which is up in the hills above the San Fernando Valley. Really nice homes, really, really nice. And She was working for another one of these clients. She said another one of these Encino homeowners that wanted her to give them a discount. Kept saying, well, can't you discount your price? And this woman finally said to the man, look, I live down in the San Fernando Valley in a little house. It's about 1,400 square feet. And you live up on the hills in a house that's like, 4,000 square feet. And you're asking me to give you a discount to work on your home and improve your home, which is like me subsidizing your house for you. How can you even think of asking for me to subsidize your house when you're obviously so much more wealthy than I am? And when she told me that story, it was kind of like, wow. Sometimes, not sometimes, I would say all the time, men get caught up in this other world of, I want that job. Okay, I'll give you the discount, or I can afford to take 5% off, or I need that work, or whatever it is. We get caught up in the business part of our lives, whereas women see right through to what's really going on. They feel it. We don't feel stuff. We see things without feeling it, and they feel things, which we don't. And it enables them sometimes to see right through to the heart of what's really going on. And when I heard that from her, it was just remarkable to me. It was like, why hadn't I ever thought of that? I used to just get pissed,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I'd get pissed, but I'd give them the discount, I'd get pissed, but I'd say, okay, I can't give you 5,000 off, but I can give you 2,500 off. Holy smokes, Why should I be giving somebody $2,500 off when they can afford to have me work on their home? I couldn't afford to have me work on my home.
Yeah.
That kind of is a different attitude entirely.
Yeah. Just another reason why we need more women in the industry.
We need more women more than just in our industry. We need more of them everywhere.
Yeah.
In more positions of power and authority and influence to balance out. This is like I won't go off too far on this tangent, but I am discovering that balance is the key to existence, basically, and to life. And there are so many things in our lives that are in balance, just like I was just talking about men and the difficulties we have, or our respect problem, whether we respect ourselves enough or not, that's an imbalance, and this whole thing with our culture, you can see that it's an imbalance, that there's too many men running everything, and their motivation isn't the same. There's no maternalistic attitude towards almost anything these days, because so many men are running the show. So it's not surprising when you think about it that we're running into some of the problems that we're running into. I'll stop right there before we get into politics.
Well, this leads right into the next question. What are we doing right and what are we doing wrong in the industry today? You've got over 40 years of perspective.
I would say, and this is kind of ironic in a way, given the situation we're in. I just can't stay away from politics. Given the situation we're in culturally and politically, I would say science has had the biggest impact on our industry. It has freaking changed the way we work and the way we build. It's improved. First, we've made mistakes. Here's a good example. First thing we did, I can remember science, first impact of science was house wrap. We switched from felt paper to plastic house wrap, big scientific progress improvement. You can't imagine some of the rumors that went on back then, about DuPont and Tyvek and how really, it originated from the Vietnam War because it came from Agent Orange or some kind of nonsense. Like these are the original conspiracy theories, that were floating around about house wrap. But The problem we had was we started seeing a lot of mold and rot and stuff in houses soon after people started installing plastic house wrap. And what the problem ended up being was that we were taking plastic house wrap and we were putting it directly on top of sheathing, the plywood sheathing. And especially when OSB came out, it created like Mushroom City behind the house wrap. Everything started rotting. The problem wasn't the house wrap. It was the combination. It was the interaction of the materials that we were installing without an awareness of what that relationship was, what was going on. Because before that, we didn't use plywood sheathing to provide shear value or such strength to a house. We put in lead braces. We cut lead braces into the framing. And then we put felt paper on, and we didn't insulate our walls. So when they got wet, they dried out. But as soon as we started using plastic house wrap, it was at the same time that we'd already started using plywood sheathing and fiberglass insulation. And the combination of all of that created this incredible greenhouse effect inside of our walls where everything rotted and mold grew and it was just terrible. Well, it took a while before people started recognizing that, hey, you can't take the plastic house wrap and put it directly up against the plywood sheathing. You've got to have some kind of way for that moisture to drain out and not get driven right through the house wrap into the plywood sheathing and cause rot. We have to have some way for the moisture to dry out. We have to have some way to stop pressure differentials from driving moisture through the house wrap. All kinds of stuff like that has been improved through science. I mean, now we're seeing house wraps that aren't just plastic, but they're rain screen or drain screen house wraps is the first improvement we saw, where the house wraps had some kind of texture. That was a scientific advance that was like, wow, it completely changed our building. And another example, bitch a thing. You go back to when I started out, there was no bitch a thing. There was lead, or tar. That was it. And then all of a sudden we had this peel and stick membrane that we could use. And I'll never forget when it first came out, I took that stuff and I wrapped everything with it. We put in columns or a post or something like that on a deck. I'd wrap the bottom of that column so water would never get in there. Well, that was the dumbest thing in the world you could do. I've told this story so many times, hundreds of times. It shows around the country. It was the dumbest thing in the world I could do because that bitch thing didn't breathe. It didn't allow moisture to dry out. It didn't allow anything to go in, but it didn't allow anything to come out. And a lot of times, those posts we were installing, the moisture content was like 40 or 50%. I mean, you drove a nail in them and you could see water come out. When you wrap them with bitchethane, the moisture is trapped inside of them, and at 40 or 50%, they rot really quick, because wood starts to rot at about 19% moisture content. You're not allowing any of that stuff to dry out. So what I was doing was perpetuating rot in the bottoms of those columns. But the science was freaking beautiful if it's used properly. And that's what we're seeing in our industry. Science today, is now being kind of targeted in ways that it wasn't when I was young, so that you can use it to, create projects and work that has longevity that you never could have achieved, 10 or 15, 20 years ago. If Frank Lloyd Wright, I've said this a million times, if he had had bitchethane, imagine how much longer his roofs would have lasted. He never would have gotten that reputation as, of a leaky roof architect. But he might also have caused an awful lot of rot with it by installing, putting it on everywhere and not allowing anything to breathe. So I think people like Joe Stebrook are having an incredible impact on our industry by helping us through his own personal, here's a guy that's about as hands-on an engineer or scientist as you can get.
Yeah.
He experiments on his own home, and he reports on those experiments with total humility. He says, hey, look, I tried this and it didn't work. That's where we're at today. We're in a place where our industry can accept failure, our own personal failure, which is just incredible for men to be able to do something like that in order to learn from it and pass it on. which is kind of like, when you need me to shut up, just tell me to shut up.
No,
It's kind of like, I have a friend who's a pilot, and he says to me one time, pilots don't have accidents. They don't make mistakes. They have incidents. And anytime anything happens with a pilot while they're flying a plane, anything, they're encouraged to report that incident as soon as they land. And the reason for that is they can then share that incident with everybody else, and everybody can learn from it. So look, I bet you a woman came up with that system. There's no way a man could, because look at the benefit of that change in perspective. All you're just doing is changing the vocabulary, and all of a sudden, wow, you're creating a dream of education from what once was a nightmare of failure. You're no longer failing, you're learning. And I think that's something that the building scientists are helping us understand too. And that's incredible when you think about it.
Yes, yes. And we have some good examples. Joe Stieberg's daughter, Christina Williamson, who is a building scientist, and she's doing a great job with her work online. I mean, who would have necessarily heard of her if she wasn't on social media today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, speaking of patience.
Oh, back to patience.
Back to patience. Gary Katz, patience. I noticed in your timeline that you sent me, thank you very much, that in 1999 you started writing the Mantelpiece book. And here we are in 2021, and you're back to it. I'd love to hear some more about the book and your plans to get it finished.
I'm not sure if that's an example of patience or obsession. Maybe there's a relationship between the two, that I should think more, more closely about. But no, it's not an obsession. It's not a hobby. It's something I'm really fortunate not to have done back in 20 years ago, because I wasn't ready. Number one, I had so many other things that I wanted to do at that time, and that was right after I published the Door Hanger's Handbook, and I was being asked to do a book on finished carpentry by JLC right then, and here I am flying around taking photographs of historic homes, trying to learn about architectural styles that I knew nothing about, and I was in this editorial meeting at Fine Homebuilding, and again, if it hadn't been for Kevin Ireton, the experience might have just ruined me. And in the middle of this meeting, the folks from Fine Homebuilding book department and the art department said to me, "Look, we don't understand what you're talking about here. Don't you have an outline that shows all the photographs you're going to put in this book?" And I said, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. This is going to be an evolutionary project." That was the word I used. As soon as I said the word, it was like, my God, lightning came out of the ceiling. People's eyes opened wide, and they realized what kind of an absolute nut was sitting at the desk with them. I said, I expect to learn from this like I did with my master's thesis. This is like an independent study for me. I'm going to learn about architectural styles. I'm going to travel around and visit just architectural historic homes. I'm going to learn about using my 4x5 view camera. This is just going to be extraordinary. And they're all going, holy, we got to get this guy out of here. And they killed my book, And right after that meeting, Kevin took me out for a cup of coffee and kind of hugged me and said, it's going to be okay, and if it weren't for that experience with him, I don't know, I might have committed suicide. It really was. It was devastating. But I wasn't ready. I needed to learn a lot more about not just architecture, but about how to express my feelings and not just my thoughts, and that's taken me 20 years to learn how to do. And hopefully I've learned enough about how to do that so that the book I'm working on now will be a success. And this is really important too, because we're talking about vocabulary. To me, a success means, will it reach the folks that I want to reach? I could care less whether the book sells, 20,000 copies in the first year or something. There are people I want to reach with this idea of architectural history and architectural styles. Carpenters who I feel would just benefit enormously from understanding more about what it is they're working on, and develop a deeper feeling for their work than just, thinking about how much they have to get done that day. So it's a real mission for me, and I'm really kind of excited by it. I've gotten past the hard part, which is starting the thing over again, but I have a lot of hard work ahead of me on it, and so it'll probably be a year or two before I really get it finished.
And we're not just talking about neoclassical, early American mantles.
No, not at all. No. That was kind of a mistake that I kind of ran into in my early study of the project too. I thought, wow, this whole Greek revival thing, the Georgian federal, Greek revival, colonial revival, all this neoclassical focus on architecture in America. I thought that's what it was all about, and I kind of thought, yeah, the Victorian period was important. There was like almost 100 years there, at least 60, where carpenters really did some crazy stuff, But, the real foundation of architecture is this neoclassical stuff. Boy, have I learned how wrong that is. I've learned that it's nice and good to have a foundation, some kind of formative understanding, of architecture in order to understand how it evolved. But that's it. Just because it doesn't mean you have to replicate a Greek revival head everywhere you go, or something like that. Doesn't mean you have to make a pediment on every single home, because I've learned that the true revolutionary architects in American history occurred, like you and I were talking about, from Downing on. Like Downing was like the first guy who thought of expressing interior space with the exterior world, inviting the exterior world into the interior space, and expressing the look of the interior of a home on the exterior of a home. Now that kind of thought was picked up by future architects like Richardson and on and on and on, and Louis Sullivan, all the way to Frank Lloyd Wright, where we see homes that become more human in a sense. They're not like a cube, like a neoclassical cube with little cubes cut up inside of it into a parlor and a this and a that, They're homes that had living rooms. Just the vocabulary itself, is interesting. Family rooms, kind of, where people actually lived. And those rooms might have had bay windows. And suddenly the bay window becomes a pop out on the exterior of a home, and then it gets a little gable or something over the top of it. And it becomes like, something you'd see in a stick style home, a Victorian home, or a little bit later, maybe it has a shed roof over the top of it. And you see dormers in the top of the roof that might have shed roofs, and you start seeing the beginnings of like the craftsman style that really originated in the stick style and the other like Victorian period styles. So it's like, wow, it's neat to be able to follow that evolutionary process of architecture and be able to better appreciate what we're doing today, what we're building today, as carpenters and architects and tradespeople,
Looking forward to it. And can we expect not a Gary Katz road show, but a Gary Katz road trip?
I am going to be traveling across the country in 2022. I wanted to do it in 2021, but the virus kind of stopped me. I'm going to be leaving here in early February and traveling in my converted Sprinter van, which is on the YouTube videos on the This Is Carpentry site. And I'm going to be photographing the exteriors of a number of houses that I shot interiors of 20 years ago. Because, like I said, I've learned so much in 20 years. I've learned that one of the goals is to help people understand from looking at a mantelpiece, the casework on the interior of a home, what the exterior style of the home would be. Or looking at the exterior style of a home, what should the interior style look like. And so I want to capture that with some exterior photographs. And there's a few other homes that I've learned about that I also want to photograph, that I need to add to the book to fill in areas that 20 years ago I didn't recognize were so important. Yeah. So that'll be like a 2-month trip. I'll be taking early winter next year, early spring rather, next year.
Nice.
And visiting a lot of carpenters along the way.
Yes, it sounds like a lot of fun.
It will be.
And you are self-described as semi-retired. Is there anything else that Gary Katz is doing in his semi-retirement besides fishing?
I put a lot of effort into the magazine, This Is Carpentry, and I put a lot of effort into the roadshow. And like all of us when we're younger, that I was like a horse with the blinders on, do this, do this, do this, do this, and not recognizing and not taking the time during all that work to really appreciate being alive, and the miracle of and the joy of the experience itself, of being alive, and that's my focus now. Kind of like I'm semi-retired to the point where I'm still working. I definitely am working on my place. You can see videos all the time of the crazy stuff I'm doing. But I'm still working, but mostly I'm working on myself. I guess I have to say that's the new balance. I'm working more skillfully on the stuff that I think is really, really, truly valuable. Yeah.
Gary, you are an inspiration, and you've done it all. You've been a carpenter, you've failed, you've succeeded, you've done videos, you've done road shows, you've done books, and now you're going to do another book, and you're going to continue to work on yourself. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really fun, Mason, and I appreciate your patience in listening to me. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jeff and Gary for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you are listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Happy building and keep craft alive.